She was gonna keep. Oh yeah, alright. Take it easy, baby. Make it last all night. She was an American girl.
This is Deborahcratic, a podcast where we sit down with everyday Americans and hear their extraordinary stories. I'm your host, Deborah Drucker. Come along with me as we discuss those things that we were always told not to talk about: politics, religion, and more. I promise you'll be inspired and have your mind opened by the end of this episode.
Well, it was kinda cold that night. She stood alone on the balcony. Yeah, she could hear the cars roll by out on 441, like waves crashing on the beach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Deborahcratic. Today, we are going to meet one seriously cool drummer. I've met some pretty great musicians in my life, and our guest today sits at the top. Clayton Cameron is a jazz drummer who has played, toured, and recorded with Sammy Davis Jr., Tony Bennett, Ray Charles, and the Count Basie Orchestra. He's known as the brush master for his unique style of using his brushes on the drums. Clayton has lived a life packed with experiences and adventures. He not only slays it on the drums, but can also be found kicking ass on the tennis court. Let's hear about the life of Clayton Cameron. Welcome, Clayton. How's it swinging today?
Well, it's swinging. I was out on the tennis court this morning, swinging the racket.
Awesome. And I know you live in Manhattan Beach now, but where did you originally come from?
Well, I grew up right in Los Angeles in an area called Mid-City. There's a big sign right at La Cienega and Venice Boulevard, and it says Mid-City. So I know that's where I'm from.
Did you have any siblings? Who'd you grow up with there?
Yeah, I have a younger sister named Zanelle. She's a professional notary living in Georgia. And my brother is also a drummer and teacher, Clinton. He's 10 years younger than me.
And did you grow up with mom and dad?
I did. My mom is still living. My father passed some years ago. They raised me right there on a little street called Dauphine Avenue.
And I see your father was from Texas, and he is a GI who was in the Army.
That's right. Yeah. My father, Noah Cameron Jr., was a serviceman. He was actually an undefeated welterweight boxing champion in the service. And it's something he never talked about, except for one time when I was helping him. He was an electrician by trade. I was helping him do some work when I was a kid. We had to crawl under a house, and he asked me to look up a certain way because he said he couldn't look that way anymore because he got hit with a punch that to that day, it caused him to have a little vertigo, So though he was undefeated, you got to watch out for that stuff.
There's a lot of pounding to the head.
Yeah.
Huh? Was he in active duty at all?
I know he was stationed in Germany for a while, but I don't think he saw any action. Yeah.
All right. So do you remember him being around a lot back in the day?
Yeah. I mean, my father was very, pardon the phrase, instrumental in, me playing drums. A next door neighbor heard me playing bongos one time. This person was actually a musician at one point in time in his life and still played congas. And his son and I were the same age, and, we were buddies. And so when I started playing my bongos around 6 years of age on, he told my dad I had some talent. My dad, immediately went out and got me some drums. But my mom was the one that was instrumental in me taking lessons. So she was like, okay, we got the drums, but you need to take some lessons. You're not going to pound those things in the house without some guidance. Yeah.
So was that a fun, happy upbringing?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, both my parents were very supportive of what I was doing. My father came to a lot of the gigs. The clubs that I grew up playing in were in the Crenshaw district. By the time I was 16, I was playing with this professional big band. And so we used to do these gigs on the weekend, and there were various clubs. There was the Memory Lane Supper Club, which was later bought by actress Marla Gibbs from the Jeffersons, and it was called Marla's Memory Lane Supper Club. There's another one right near Slauson called the 20 Grand. And so I got to, play with a lot of different artists in the community, like Ernie Andrews, Lorez Alexandria, O.C. Smith, while I was in my teens.
How cool. So in that household, it's you and your sister and your brother, and mom and dad are married. What was that household like? Did they ever talk about like the politics going on around them?
Not so much with my parents, but my next door neighbor, Jerry and Ellie Schnitzer, they were communists. They would hand out these flyers and stuff. And so a lot of the upbringing and politics and stuff was kind of inadvertent with them because they literally lived right next door. In terms of my parents, I knew that they were Democrats, but in terms of, them talking about politics, never really talked much about it.
All right. Well, that happens. And did they vote when there were elections?
Oh, yeah. My mother would later not vote because she became a Jehovah's Witness. And so they don't participate in politics or birthdays or holidays, that sort of thing.
Growing up, was there religion prior to your mom becoming a Jehovah's Witness? Did you grow up with religion? The
only time I really went to church is when I went to visit my grandmother. And that was the Baptist church up in the Central Valley in a little town called Tulare. I remember early on the preacher saying, brothers and sisters, you got to think about putting money in the tray before you take it out. It's like, what is he talking about? What scripture is that?
Was it a musical church, that Baptist one?
A lot of singing. They didn't have a band, though. It wasn't like the gospel, mega churches and stuff like that. No, this is just a little community church and, lots of singing, but not the bands that we know now, which is, borderline funk groups,
Right. I mean, there's mega churches now that have big rock bands.
Oh, yeah. No, they are rocking. It's like, you're going to a show.
I know. Well, hey, it brings them in, right? It fills those trays. As a kid, what kind of music did you like? Because, you were born the same year that Motown was born.
My love for music kind of started with television, because that's where you would see artists. And I remember, my favorite shows were like the Lawrence Welk Show, Hee Haw. And until Soul Train came on, those were the shows I knew were, guaranteed that there was someone going to be playing an instrument. It didn't really matter what the style was. And so then my mother, she won some television show. It was one of those game shows. And so she won a host of gifts. And one of them was a record player. I said, Mom, can I have the record player? Can I? And so then I started playing my dad's records, which were a lot of jazz records. So between me buying the Motown 45s for my record player and playing my dad's records, so I was listening to jazz as well as, R&B. So that's what I really started up really listening to. So he had Miles Davis records. He had a lot of singers like Dakota Staton and Sarah Vaughan, Nancy Wilson and Cannonball. I started listening to those. And so I really would, play my record player and try to mimic and try to, mime and figure out what the drummers were doing on those records.
All right. So you fell for jazz pretty hard, though. Not so much the R&B, huh? Mm-hmm. And are you from a musical family?
No one in my immediate family played an instrument. My mom, she had a good ear and she could sing a little bit, but neither my dad or mom played an instrument. And
so did you study music?
Yeah. Once, I got the drum set at 12 years of age, my mom was like, oh, no, you're going to go take some lessons, So there was a little mom and pop music store called Grant's Music Center. I studied drums there from the age of 12 on up until I was 18 years of age, so I was there for many years. I also studied with a musician by the name of Billy Moore, who taught me how to play mallets, so marimba and vibes, that sort of thing. And so that gave me the ability to audition for, college. So I got a performance degree from Cal State University, Northridge.
And then out of college, are you gigging right away, or what happens after college?
Yeah, I was even gigging during college. There was a great musician, he passed away a few years ago, named Gerald Wilson, who was a big part of the big band era going into bebop and all that. Anyway, so Gerald used to teach a history of jazz class at Cal State Northridge. He asked me, after I did a performance for one of his jazz classes, he asked me to record if I was available to do a recording session. And so, I recorded an album with him while I was in college. And so that really kind of put me in touch with a lot of the other musicians that I would end up playing with, during my career, even to this day.
And then when you get out of college, where does that take you?
At first, it was a little quiet. You're like wondering, what am I going to do? And then I got a call to move to Las Vegas to work with a great jazz pianist by the name of Kirk Stewart at the Desert Inn Hotel, which is no longer in existence. I worked there honing kind of my skill with brushes because the casino would not allow us to play above a certain volume level. They just didn't want to distract from the tables, because if people said, oh man, the music sounds good, let's go over there and, take them off the Pai Gow or the blackjack table, that was not, a good thing. So that was reserved for people who lost money and given drink tickets, the lounge, So I never played with sticks for the entire gig. I only played with brushes for the 8 months that I did that gig. Our gig was kind of a weird gig. You get there at 9:00, you play a 45-minute set, and then two other bands would come on, and then you would play, about 2 hours after that, and then the same thing would happen. So, you start the gig at 9 and you end up like in 2 a.m. So we had these long breaks, and it was really weird because I didn't want to go home and go to sleep because I might not wake up. So it was really a hard gig in that sense. But anyway, during the breaks, sometimes Kirk would say, hey, so-and-so is in town. Let's go. We're on the break. We're going to go over there. And so one of those times was Sammy Davis Jr. and the Count Basie Orchestra was playing at Caesar's Palace. The Count Basie Orchestra was cool. It was great. They were backing Sammy. But Sammy was just it was amazing, amazing performance. And I said, wow, man, I'd love to play with that guy one day. And so as I was leaving to go back to my gig at the Desert Inn, I saw the conductor sitting having dinner between his shows. His name was George Rhodes. And so we ended up talking, and we knew a lot of the same people. And so maybe 6 months later, I would find out that he was looking for a drummer. And so I wrote a script, and I called him up and I left a message reading the script. Hello, Mr. Rhodes, my name is Clayton Cameron. I don't know if you remember me, but I met you at the Caesar's Palace, and I heard that I was so nervous. I was just reading this thing. And so George, he did call me back, and he told me, of course I remember you, and you've already been considered for an audition. Anyway, so I ended up auditioning for Sammy, and I ended up getting the job, and and I was his last drummer. I worked with him for 8 years until he passed away.
Wow. Well, I grew up the street from Sammy Davis Jr. He lived on Pickfair.
That's right. Right across from Jerry Bus.
That's right. Right there. And we used to bust into Jerry Buses, too, to go to the parties after the sports event. So I go back to that neighborhood, and I think of Sammy, and I think I saw him once out on the front. One
he
time.
traveled a lot. I mean, we were on the road a lot. Yeah.
He had a pretty wife, too. I remember that.
Yeah, Altavis. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your favorite gig that you ever did with Sammy?
There are many, but because it happened right when I started with the gig, our first gig was in Minnesota, the Minnesota Fairgrounds, and I hadn't met Sammy or anything like that. And so anyway, long story short, we do the show, and I never met Sammy. And suddenly I hear his voice, I'm looking at the music, and there he is. I was like, wow, and I had to kind of pinch myself and say, pay attention, because I never heard him sing live, and now I'm playing with him, and I didn't really know the music. I had to just really focus on reading. And so after the show, Sammy took everybody out to dinner. We go to this fancy restaurant, and I'm really feeling awkward, but I did the gig, and I don't know what to do or expect. So we sit down, and during the dinner, Sammy stands up and he takes a knife to a glass and clicks it and wants to say a few words. He thanks everyone. Hey, great show tonight. Blah, blah, blah. And then he goes, and I want to welcome our new drummer, Big C. So
Bravo.
First of all, I never really thought about whether I had the job or not. It was like, I just thought I had the job. I didn't even know, I didn't even consider it an audition. I was just so naive. I was like, well, I got through that one. And so when he said Big C, that was, how he referred to me all the time that I was with him. He never said Clayton at all. It was always Big C. So that was real memorable for that sense. And then we had this 2-week gig in New York City with Bill Cosby. That gig was probably one of the most memorable gigs because I met a lot of my heroes. So Art Blakey, a drumming jazz legend, was in the wings when I was coming off stage. And I was like, man, that looks like Art Blakey. And before I could really finish my thought, Art Blakey says, come over here, you little African. I heard you up there, gives me this big hug. And he tells me that there's a jam session at this club called Fat Tuesdays tomorrow night that he was giving, and he wanted me to come. So already I was like, oh my God, that's Art Blakey. And he wants me to come to a jam session. I go to his jam session and I meet all these other people that I listen to on record, So a guy by the name of Jack DeJohnette, another legend by the name of Roy Haynes. One of the nights, as the curtain goes up and the orchestra was playing an overture, the house lights are still on. And I see Miles Davis sitting in the middle, the sea of white faces, this one black guy sitting there in the audience. And so I was like, oh my God, that looks like Miles. So anyway, the lights go down, I play the show, but I felt so distracted. I felt, oh man, that was the worst show ever. And so anyway, he didn't come back. I didn't see him. And so I peeked out of the curtain and he was still sitting in one of the rows. And so he sees me peek out and he hops up out of his seat and says, hey, drummer, come here. I was like, oh my God, Miles, he's calling me? What? So I hop off the stage and he's like, man, you a bad mother, beep, 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 And, how you do that beep, beep on the cymbals, that's some bad beep, every other word. And so I met Miles and became friends with Miles that night. So for me, that was one of the most memorable gigs, just because I met a lot of my heroes. I never expected that. And I became friends with Miles Davis.
That's amazing. And so the door opened with Sammy Davis Jr.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I saw that one of the inspirations for your brush technique was that you would watch like Sammy Davis tap dancing with some sand on the ground. Is that where it began?
Sammy, of course, was a great hoofer. And one of the engagements that we did was a 2-week engagement with Jerry Lewis at the Bally's Hotel in Las Vegas. And so Sammy had just finished wrapping a movie called Tap that Gregory Hines had produced. He just got all these fabulous dancers in the movie. So after he wrapped that movie, 3 of the dancers did the show with Jerry and Sammy at Bally's. One was Sandman Sims, another by the name of Arthur Duncan, and Bunny Briggs. Sandman Sims is the one that would spread sugar or salt on the floor and slip slide his rhythms. Arthur Duncan, who I used to see on the Lawrence Welk show, was a really acrobatic dancer. And then Bunny Briggs had this rapid fire type of tap dance. He'd barely be moving his upper body, but his feet would, really be moving. So for those 2 weeks that we were doing that engagement, I tried to emulate what I was seeing, So I would go back to my hotel room with my brushes and a pad. And so it was an epiphany for me in that I found that I had to create new techniques in order to try to emulate them. It took me, several years to actually figure it out, how to use it. But it was a big turning point in my life.
Well, you are the master of the brushes, so that's a great story of how it began. And I wanted to know also if on any of the tours that you've been on with all these fabulous people, and we're going to get to some more of those fabulous people that you worked with, did you ever encounter any racism or any hate?
Things didn't so much happen when you're performing and people know who you are. It's like when you go walking through neighborhoods and stuff. I think about the Aubrey murder, Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered while jogging through a neighborhood in Georgia. And I know there were many a time where I would be, somewhere on the East Coast or wherever it was in the United States, And during the day, I might want to take a jog, and sometimes, I was by myself. Most often I was. And, there were occasions where, people didn't come up to me straight up, but I remember a guy literally coming out of his house, not following me, but checking me out, like, what the fuck is he, And so, I get it. I guess that, no one that looks like me lives in the neighborhood. So I don't know what they were thinking, but all I know is that it didn't feel comfortable.
And you grew up in LA. So I'm taking it you grew up in an area that you never had to deal with that kind of stuff.
No, I mean, what's interesting is, I've probably dealt with more of that in Manhattan Beach than I have some other places.
Where you are today, right?
Yeah. There were times, my brother, he wrote a story about when he was riding with me on Sunset and how we got pulled over and put our hands on the hood and all this kind of stuff, and frisk and basically violating every right that we had. There was no reason for them to stop us other than he said that we were cruising, and, we weren't cruising. But, it's just stuff like that, you just be cool. My dad, told me early on how to deal with the police. I've told my son how to deal with the police, much to the surprise of a lot of my friends who are not Black. When some of the recent killings, by police officers have happened and become news worthy, they ask me, have you ever had any problem like that? Yeah. It's happened to me, but it's one of those things where it's like a code, that, okay, I'm being stopped by the police, put your hands on the wheel so they can see them, there's all these little steps. Right. And I remember a friend of mine who happened to be Jewish. I told her about one time when I was being followed from not far from where I live to Target at night. It was around 9:00 at night. I was going to get something and the police followed me all the way to the parking lot. And he got out of his car and I just basically ignored him. I said, if he's got something to say, he'll say it. And so I just ignored him and walked on into Target and he didn't say anything. And I shared that with my friend and she said, oh my God, I would have cursed him out. I said, well, that's great that you feel you could do that and there would be no consequences. That's the part that people don't get is that, oh yeah, I would have done so-and-so. Because you have no fear that that person will pull out a gun and shoot you.
Right. You're just
wouldn't even think
being
about
a person.
Yeah. You're just like, you're giving your grievance. And I don't have that. And I don't feel that today. I don't feel that I could do what she said, curse out a police officer and not feel that he might just shoot me.
Right. Right.
It's just, I don't feel that way. I'm not afraid of police, but I just am aware that there are people and that they may have a certain line of thinking, not all of them, but I don't know, it's a lottery,
right.
A bad lottery.
It's a little bit roulette. Yeah. So I'm sorry about that. I would hope that at this day and age, we have progressed out of this kind of situation. However, I'm going to get back to your career and then we're going to go back into a little bit of political chatter. Now you've worked with Sammy Davis Jr., then you're playing with Tony Bennett, the great late Tony Bennett. How does that happen?
So, I had a really great career with Sammy. And because of Sammy, I worked with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. I did that tour together again in 88, 89, where they got back together. And so when Tony Bennett was looking for a drummer, I had been recommended. I think maybe someone else was asked and they said, hey, well, you should, check out this person. He played with Sinatra and all that. But I had met Tony in Atlantic City on the tennis court when I was touring with Sammy in the 80s.
Oh, so he liked to play tennis too, huh?
Yeah. So Tony was a tennis player. And so there was only one tennis club in Atlantic City that you could go to in the daytime. So I would go over almost practically every day and just work out, hit some balls. So Tony came one day to have his daughter take a tennis lesson. While she was taking her lesson, Tony wanted somebody to hit with. So the pro said, hey, Cece, could you hit with Tony, while his daughter takes the lesson? So I said, sure. So we actually met on the tennis court. And so when I got recommended for the gig years later, I reminded Tony that, hey, we met on the tennis court back in Atlantic City. And we're on a plane going to a gig up in San Francisco. This is my first gig. Tony said, well, do you have your racket? And I said, yeah. So we landed in San Francisco. We got in his limo and went to the San Francisco Tennis Club and played tennis before we even checked into our hotel. So I became kind of like the drummer and the tennis valet for Tony. So it was great because, I could call any club and just say, hey, Mr. Tony Bennett would like to play tennis. So it was like, not ever did anyone say, no, this is a private club. And so Tony would call me, hey, Clay, you got some place for us to play when we get to, yeah. Oh yeah, I got it worked out, Tony. So that was kind of our routine when we were traveling, go play tennis in the morning.
And how long did you tour or play or have this musical relationship with Tony?
It's about 13 years.
Nice gig.
Yeah, it was great.
And I see you mentioned that you had a son, so I take it you were married. Was it the byproduct of being a musician that caused that marriage to fail?
Well, I have two kids. I have my daughter, Sarah, who's just graduated from college last year. She's a mechanical engineer. And my son, he's in high school, and I raised them both after the divorce. But no, I wouldn't say it was that. It was something, just two people that grew apart, I guess you could say.
Do your kids have any interest in music or jazz at all?
Not really. I mean, they listen to it. I think they're pretty well versed in arts, period, because of all the things that we've introduced them to when they were growing up, whether it be them coming to one of my concerts or whether me taking them to a concert, a host of television shows that they went to, and then traveling and all that. So,
And did they grow up with any politics in the environment there? Would you say that you raised them in a more democratic household or?
Well, in terms of politics, I didn't really discuss politics per se with them. Gave them a lot of experiences with, kind of liberal type of events and parties, that sort of thing. For instance, every year we take them and we do a fundraiser for kids with disabilities. So it was never kind of like, how you got to vote for a Republican, but look at the people that are doing these particular things. And that's what it was trying to teach them. It's just more of the humanistic part of life as opposed to the, political, which is, often just full of lies and posturing and all that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. And when you are out there just moving about, do you think because you have the platform you have, do you feel a responsibility to speak out and take sides during an election? Or is it best to just shut up and play?
I think that's the most ridiculous thing, is that the shut up and dribble from Ingram. I mean, these people, they sit on this imaginary white horse as if they're the only ones because they have some particular title, journalist or whatever they want to call themselves. And then, pass that sort of judgment to other people who are citizens just because they're famous basketball players that they can't say something. I mean, it's just ridiculous because, oftentimes I wonder, like, when you hear these people say, the American people want, and I'm like, well, who the fuck are they talking about? I mean, I don't want that. I'm an American, so these broad brushstrokes and then these condemnation of people who happen to be celebrities or athletes or whatever it is, for some reason, they're no longer an American people,
So do you feel it's a stage to voice your opinion then or to not?
I think whatever you feel comfortable with in terms of how you do things, because it may not be, I remember the great Arthur Ashe had a very serious debate with the Black Panthers. And Arthur Ashe said, look, approach things that way. I'll do it my way and you'll do it your way. And so I think that it's for us as individuals. And fortunately, that's what we have the freedom to do here in this particular political system where we can make the choice of how we wish to protest or how we wish to help others or go against things that we don't think is right. I'm not a shut up person, but I'm not probably going to be the one that's going to lead your political agenda, that sort of thing.
Great. And so, Clayton, you worked with Frank Sinatra. Tell me a little bit about interacting with Frank.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with him and, interact with Sinatra. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's, Sinatra was great. A lot of times I feel that, and I'm please don't take this the wrong way. I think that in certain societies, especially America, white people are elevated sometimes, where you have Nat King Cole who gets a 15-minute show and he was just as good as the Sinatra.
The best.
And so because of oppression and prejudice, he's not allowed to flourish as a Frank Sinatra. So when I look at Sinatra and I look at Sammy Davis, I don't think that Sammy Davis had to bow down to anybody in terms of talent, but yet, Sinatra was Sinatra and everybody loved him. And, he was this big star in America at that time during the 40s when we're coming out of Jim Crow and all that kind of stuff, where black performers. I mean, I remember Sammy telling me the story where he and his dad and uncle were performing. They did that vaudeville circuit and they were really rising, and he was starting to be able to sing because at first they were just a hoofing act. And Sammy was describing how one night he decided he was going to go out and address the audience. Normally during that time when black acts came out, the audience was white. There may be a black section. The audience was white. And so the entertainers addressed each other. Hey, how's it going, Deborah? Oh, I'm fine, Clayton. How you doing? So it was a back and forth between the two of them. They never addressed the audience, ever. So Sammy decided one night, for some reason, that he was going to go out and say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." And he did that, and there was a gasp in the audience. People, is he talking to us?
Wow, even with Sammy, I guess so early on, huh?
Yeah, this is early on. And so that's my point, is that we have people that are elevated, and then we have people who are being held down. This guy can't even come out and say good evening.
It's terrible.
And he's one of the greatest entertainers in the world. He can't even say good evening without you getting upset.
Yeah.
So when I say, Frank Sinatra was elevated, what I mean by that is not that his talent wasn't happening, but is that he was allowed certain things and Nat King Cole wasn't.
Right.
I mean, that's all I'm saying.
Well, being that Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra were the crooners of the day, were they very different characters?
Oh, yeah. Well, so see, Tony was, he's 10 years younger than Sinatra, give or take a year or two. Tony was introduced to jazz by Ralph Sharon, a British pianist that was with him for many years, 40 plus years. So the idea of how he got introduced was not like through a Sinatra kind of thing, I mean, he knew of Sinatra, but his style, Tony's style, was not of that of the big bands. You had Sinatra coming out of, Harry James and all that, and then leading his own band and those sort of things. Tony really did a lot of modeling of his singing based on Ella Fitzgerald, on Billie Holiday, So he never emulated the same people that Sinatra did. And he did not emulate Sinatra. In fact, Tony would rather not sing with a big band because that's what Sinatra did. So he went in the completely opposite direction, and that's what made him unique. He was modeling after a whole nother source that to this day, I bet you no one really thinks about that. But I'm telling you, night after night, you could hear certain phrases that he would do that came from those female vocalists.
Moving towards politics again, how closely do you follow politics?
I hate to admit it, but I do probably have all the liberal stations on. And then I'll put on Fox every now and then just to see how much I can take and then turn it off. And in terms of print, because I'm also interested in finance, I still like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times for reading. But yeah, I'm kind of one of those cable junkies. I got my favorite talking heads.
Yep.
To me, they're more like editorials in a newspaper.
Right.
So that's how I look at it. I'm not just like consuming it and going, oh, yeah, that's right. No, I'm like, yeah, you don't really need to say that,
Use a little discernment. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just so. So I have to admit that I do, I do consume quite a bit of that.
Do you feel, though, who gets elected makes a difference in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Elections matter. We feel a little powerless sometimes. But, they actually, absolutely, they make a difference. When you elect people and they get in, they may not have your point of view. And so they're going to push to have some sort of other agenda. So absolutely, it matters who gets elected. With each person, there's going to be some sort of different approach.
So since we're in the political conversation here, how do you feel about the political landscape in America today?
Well, I think it's become okay to be two-faced and lie. It's okay. It's like, you can call people out on stuff and it's like it never happened. And it's like narcissistic tendencies to the nth degree where it's all about you. At least that's what I'm seeing in the landscape, the political landscape, where you just have people just jumping fences just to take advantage and be in power. And if you think about it, and I think about this with celebrities often, it's very dangerous, when people lose their own way and they're just depending on other people's viewpoint and whatnot. And it's also very dangerous when people have so much adulation, they lose sight of reality. And I think that's what happens with people like who become dictators and all of that, that need that, to feed on that, so that narcissistic tendencies like a Donald Trump, it feeds into that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. A narcissist can be proven wrong time and time again, and they'll just keep moving on. And he's the epitome of that. It doesn't really matter what people say about him. He's just going to keep rolling. You cannot stop this guy.
And I so agree. There is a contingent of followers that definitely need a leader. They're looking for a guru. Mm-hmm. They're looking for,
Jim Jones.
Leader.
I mean, why
for sure,
do we have
Jim Jones?
Jim Jones?
I'm in Jonestown. That was crazy. So what specifically, if anything, ails you most about the political world around us?
Well, one thing?
Well, you can give me your top three if you'd like.
Okay, well, I'll stick with the politics and government. It's almost like when a little kid tells you a lie. I mean, he really thinks he's going to get away with something. And you don't think that the kid thinks you're stupid. It's just that that's their capacity to try to get away with something. But now we have people who are acting like children and telling you lies, and you just know, do you think I'm stupid? And so when I look at the Supreme Court, and you have these people on there that say, okay, yes, Roe versus Wade is standard law. That cannot be changed. That's what they say at their hearing. And then they get to the Supreme Court and they vote it out. And that's what I'm talking about, where now it doesn't matter whether you lie or not, whether you get busted, as long as you get what you wanted. If we're going to go this route, I think either the Supreme Court needs to be, they need to add more people to it just to balance that out. I feel like the Democratic Party, don't have like the kahunas that the Republicans do. Just say stuff and go, If you look at Mitch McConnell blocking Obama from getting his Supreme Court nomination even heard, what was the first thing? Oh, well, it's too close to an election. We can't do that. And then election time comes around when they're in party and it's very close to an election. It's damn near an election. And they do it. Yeah. So it has nothing to do with truth. I say we operate, it's not my saying, but we operate as human beings on fear and love. And most of the time people, they're in fear of losing their power. It's not that they're loving other people and want to do for them. So, starting with the Supreme Court, I think Democrats should either increase the number of seats, or there should be some sort of law where, give them time limits, because it just seems like they're just too damn comfortable.
So last question, and we're going to let you go because we thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and I honor your time. So I really appreciate you. And I guess my last question would be, what do you most hope for the future of our country?
That's a tough one, because there's the kind of frilly, like, I just want all mankind to get along in peace, love, and happiness, that sort of thing.
That's a good one.
It's good. It's good. I don't think I'll see that in my lifetime. However, I think there just needs to be more focus on really starting at early ages with our children so that they can grow up and be adults that are tolerant. We have such intolerance for other people in ways. So somehow, it'd be great if we can start early on, get some of these crazy adults out the way. But we have all these different ideologies, and that's what we fight over. We fight over what we think, It doesn't have to be reality. Most of it is fiction anyway. If we can get the fiction just out of the way, but this is impossible because we're the only species on the planet that's capable of creating fiction,
Good point.
So I don't know.
That's a good point. That is a good point. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, we are.
Yeah, that's not my thought. I mean, I got that from Yuval Noah Harari with his Sapiens book. Have you?
I have not.
It's a great book. I mean, that was a very, I thought, poignant point,
Truly.
Just
Truly is. Well, listen, let's get upbeat here on our out. And Clayton, you just keep on swinging on the courts and in the music venues. And I hope I get to catch one of your performances someday soon.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
This episode of Deborahcratic was hosted by me, Deborah Drucker. It was produced by Lee Rocker with co-production and editing by Gideon Brower. Our amazing music was performed by Amy Nelson and Kathy Guthrie of Folk Uke. Be sure to rate and review this episode wherever you listen to podcasts. For more Deborahcratic, check out Deborahcratic.com and our Instagram at Deborahcratic. That's Deborah Cratic, like democratic. Until next time.
Political is